Rolling is something that nearly every 3D action game does, but it's not the best way to avoid damage. There's something wrong with it. To understand what that is and how to fix it, we need to go back to the beginning, to one of the first examples of this mechanic in any game. Ocarina of Time was a pretty niche game on release. Basically no one played it and it went yeah, okay, you get the bit. Being one of the first 3D action adventure games, Ocarina of Time had a lot of responsibility. It had to set the precedent for decades of game design, and because of this, it added a few things that would become staples of the genre. Of course, there's Z-targeting, an ability so fundamentally important that it persists decades later. But more importantly, and just as influentially, we gained the ability to roll. This addition is exceptionally important as it allows you to break things you're not supposed to, and grants the ability to travel faster than light. Oh, and I guess it also lets you dodge enemy attacks. It's easy to forget, but this single addition in one game over 20 years ago has effectively written the formula for evasion in nearly every melee-focused 3D action game. You know that feeling when you boot up a 3D action game and something just feels off? It's really tough to put a finger on it, but then you realize you're not subscribed to mhswoocer on YouTube and you're potentially... you can't roll. You realize that you can't roll. It feels like something that you should just naturally be able to do because it's in everything from Dark Souls to Astral Chain, but it comes at a cost. See, there's this idea of downtime. Kingdom Hearts is probably the most obvious example of this. Despite having one of the best combat systems in any 3D game, Kingdom Hearts also has moments like this where you just roll around the battlefield to avoid the boss's attacks. This is what I mean by downtime. You, as the player, aren't really doing anything here. You're just waiting for the boss to finish their turn so that you can continue to play the video game. But how do you fix this? Well, from what I've seen, there are two different ways to go about it. One that finds a unique blend between the abilities of the player and the enemy, and a second option that reinvents combat in a 3D space by totally eliminating downtime altogether. More on that one later though. First, let's look at Parrying, one of the best additions not just to 3D combat, but to combat as a whole. I'm not sure what the first game to introduce parrying was, but whoever had this idea was a genius. There are very few things in games more satisfying than landing a perfectly timed parry. You can only parry when you really know the timing of the attack that's coming at you, and you're bold enough to leave yourself open if you fail. That's what makes parrying so satisfying. You're challenging the game and claiming that you're ready for whatever's gonna come next, so much so that you're willing to take this risk that you don't even need to take. As for the reward part of the equation, successful parries do dozens of different things depending on the game you're playing. Parrying in something like Elden Ring or Skyward Sword leaves the enemy wide open for a massive hit, while parrying in Monster Hunter may give you a damage buff. Parrying can even be used to deflect projectiles in rare cases. Overall, it's one of the most brilliant additions to 3D combat, and as far as downtime goes, it reduces it significantly. Parrying allows you to interrupt an enemy's attack. So now, if you don't want to roll and wait for an opening, you can just parry and make your own. But we can go even further than this. The problem, and I use that term very lightly, with parrying is that it requires the enemy to use an attack that can actually be parried. For example, you can't usually parry massive explosions, or attacks that are simply too big. Furthermore, there can still be a bit of downtime when you're waiting for the right moment to parry. You can't parry an attack that hasn't come out yet. So let's look at the option that I think is reinventing 3D combat, something I like to call dynamic dodging. Dynamic dodging is similar to rolling, the key difference being the addition of an extra step. My personal favorite example of this, and the inspiration for this video, is the Soaring Wyvern Blade from Monster Hunter Rise. This move sends the hunter flying into the air and sets them up for a big attack. But go back a bit, it's this jump that we're concerned with. This jump allows you to avoid a ton of different attacks, and right after attacking, the monster will often leave themselves wide open. This is what I'd call a dynamic dodge. It's a dodge that quickly sets you up for your next attack. Another example from the same game is the wire step. This quickly swings the hunter around the monster and has a ton of lag if you don't immediately attack after it. But dynamic dodging isn't just about setting up attacks. Hades has a much more aggressive version of this idea. In Hades, you gain certain abilities that allow your dash to deal damage, reflect projectiles, and even create your own. This all comes together to effectively drop downtime to 0. You're either attacking, you're preparing an attack in an evasive way, or you're using your dodge to continue the assault. Thanks to dynamic dodging and this total lack of downtime, you don't have to wait for the enemy to give you a turn, because your turn never ends. But if you're still interested in combat, you can check out this video on Capcom and FromSoft's secret. Just how do they make their combat so great? And I know I make YouTube videos, so you might think I've played every single video game known to man, but as astonishing as this may be, I have not. I'm sure there are plenty of examples of dynamic dodging that I don't know about, so let me know in the comments if you can think of any.